Welcome to PWE Music. I'm Dr. Patrick Engler, and today we have a Beginner Clarinet Academy video that we're going to combine some of the shorter videos I've done in the past couple weeks into one longer one that's going to replicate what a first clarinet lesson might look like. And so this one's really aimed at parents of beginner students, and you can watch this with your beginner student and get an idea of what they're doing and how they're getting started on clarinet so you can do it along with them. And if they need help when they're at home, you can be right there along with them and be able to give them some guidance and help them out with what they might be having trouble with. Let's get to it. So to get started today, we're going to grab our clarinet case, and we also need to have our reeds. So let's open the case up. Here we have the whole clarinet in pieces. We're just going to start with the ligature and mouthpiece and the barrel. So first, we'll start by taking the mouthpiece cap and the ligature off of the mouthpiece. We're going to grab our cork grease, and with all these joints that have cork on them, we want to use just a little bit of cork grease. So we're just going to put a little bit on there, swirl it around with our fingers. We just want a thin layer on there. If you have too much on there, it'll work against itself and it'll make the clarinet kind of gross. So when we put these together, we want to have the mouthpiece go into the smaller side of the barrel. So you can see this side's a little bit smaller than that side. Smaller side's the top, bigger side is the bottom. We can also see that that one doesn't quite fit together right. So we're going to put the mouthpiece in the top, and when we put these together with all these, we're going to twist and push, and it should be a nice tight connection. You don't want it to be wiggly or anything. If it's wiggly, you probably need to get that cork replaced. If it's too tight and you feel like you're forcing it, try using a little bit more cork grease, or you may need to take it to the shop and have them shave that cork down. But we have our mouthpiece and our barrel together. Next, we're going to put our ligature over the mouthpiece, and you want to have these screws nice and loose, regardless of the type of ligature you have. And the screws you want to have on the right. So I know that some people like to spin them around so that they're on the left, but the ligatures are all designed to hold the reed on the mouthpiece in the best way with the screws to the right. But if you forget and the screws are on the left, it's not the end of the world. Let's be careful and set that down while we get a reed out. And you can start by pulling a reed out and soaking it in your mouth or a small cup of water before you start putting the mouthpiece and barrel together, and then it'll be ready to go. I was just playing on this, so it's already a little bit moist. What we're going to do is hold the barrel in your palm, and with your thumb and first finger, regardless of which hand you like using, we're going to push the ligature up so it's loose on the mouthpiece. Right about there is probably fine. We're going to slide the reed under the ligature, and the shiny part where the bark is still on the reed is going to go down on the bottom, and we're doing this along the flat face of the mouthpiece. So the flat side of the reed is going to match up with the flat side of the mouthpiece. We're going to push that reed down. Then with your thumbs on both hands, we're going to adjust the reed, and we're going to make it so that it's centered. And my rule of thumb is you want to match the tip of the reed up with the tip of the mouthpiece. So if we look at it, the reed isn't, you're not going to see black showing above the reed, nor if we turn it around are you going to see the reed showing above the mouthpiece. Once your reed's in place, hold it down, lower the ligature, and my rule of thumb here is that the ligature you want to be completely on the bark of the reed, so that smooth, shiny part. So your ligature may be still a little bit loose here, so keep holding the reed while you tighten the screws. And like everything else, we don't want to over tighten it, just tight enough so it's not going to move. So this is what we're going to be starting with. Again, tip of the reed matches the tip of the mouthpiece, ligature screws to your right. And now we can work on some embouchure and getting that first sound. Now that we've got the mouthpiece, barrel, reed, and ligature all assembled, we're going to talk about how to form an embouchure, and we're going to make a first sound with this setup here. And so what we're ultimately going for is a sound like this. So it's going to be a little high-pitched, kind of squeaky sound. Now, how we want to begin is we want to have the reed against our bottom lip. And the easiest way that I've come to find to describe this is we're going to put this reed on your bottom lip so that the tip kind of matches where the top of your bottom lip is. And then we're just going to push it in until this pointed part locks in behind the front teeth. So the front teeth will be on this mouthpiece patch. Bottom lip will be curled over, touching the reed, curled over the bottom teeth. So again, we're going to put it on the bottom lip. The tip of the mouthpiece and the reed is kind of like where your lips would meet. You're going to push it in until the top here locks in behind your front teeth. Once you do that, you want to bring your corners in. So it's like we're saying ooh, like oh. Like ooh, that's something that looks really good. So bring the mouthpiece in, bring the corners around. And you want to be tight. You don't want to be full jaw pressure, just tight enough. And once we try to blow some air, we'll see we can adjust and figure out what needs to happen. So we're going to push the mouthpiece in, bring the corners in, and then try blowing some air. So that time I tried to demonstrate what might happen. And you'll probably start off with air that's a little bit too weak, like you heard there. And if you hear just that air sound, that means one of two things. One, your air might not be fast enough, so you need to push harder from the diaphragm. Two, you might not be tight enough with the embouchure, specifically with these corners. So if you hear that air sound, that means speed up the air and tighten up the embouchure a little bit, and the sound should come out. Something like that. Now on the opposite side, if it feels like you're blowing against a brick wall, you're blowing as hard as you can and seems like it's not going through, that means you're too tight here. In which case, loosen up a little bit. And something like that should happen. So now that we're ready to put the whole clarinet together, we're back here. We have the rest of the clarinet still in the case, keeping it protected. We have our reed, mouthpiece, ligature, and barrel put to the side. We want to put the mouthpiece cap on to protect the reed while we assemble the rest of the clarinet and make sure that's in a safe place so it doesn't roll away or anything. What we'll be starting with is the bell and the lower joint. And you can tell the lower joint because that's the one with the thumb rest. And so the main rule of thumb when we're putting together the parts with the keys on it is you just want to be as gentle as you can be. Clarinets are a little more resilient than a lot of students think, but we don't want to be reckless and squeeze it too hard. So to put together these two, I like to grab this like this on the bottom joint. So this rod here is going to be in my palm, kind of cradled. And again, you want to start with some cork grease on this cork joint to make sure that it's well lubricated. And again, we're going to twist and push. And don't worry if this joint doesn't fit together perfectly. On a lot of clarinets, it doesn't always go together exactly right. So we have these two together. And we don't ever want to set the clarinet, even when it's just like this, on the bell without one of these stands. That's why I recommend having a stand. It just gives you an extra layer of protection, and then you're not having to lie it down on the keys. Now we're going to take the upper joint, and here I'm going to point out the one thing we want to watch when we put together the two joints is we want to watch the bridge key. And this is a connection between the upper and lower joint, so that when we press down on these rings on the lower joint, it will push this ring specifically down on the upper joint. Once they're together, I'll be able to show you. But the upper joint, part of the bridge key, will go over the lower joint part of the bridge key. And we can see that's going to match up here. So once they're together, those two are going to match up. And so, again, I hold the lower joint in the same position, cradling this rod in my palm. And then the upper joint is kind of the best thing, however best works for you. To be safe, we want to hold it so that we're pressing down this second ring so that the bridge key will pop up. And that way, when we twist and push these together, that's going to be raised so it slides over the bottom part of the bridge and we don't damage it. So now that we're together, we can see we push down these rings on the lower joint and the upper joint will move together with them. And we do want to make sure that they're aligned. It may be touching each other but not quite aligned, in which case this may not close completely. Just look at the key on your instrument and you should be able to see how it's aligned. Now we have the main body of the clarinet assembled. Let's put together this with our mouthpiece and barrel. And here, this one's pretty simple. We just twist and push them together. And we want to make sure that once it's together, the reed is going to line up with this key here, the register key, which should line up with the thumb rest. We should have a nice line from reed, register key, thumb rest. And it doesn't have to be perfectly straight. We just want to make sure, again, the reed is facing the right way and the bridge key is aligned. That's the most important part about putting the clarinet together. Everything else, as long as it's facing the right way, you're all good. So now we have this whole clarinet assembled. Let's work on playing our first notes. Now that we've got the whole clarinet assembled, let's try to put that embouchure work we did with just the barrel and mouthpiece to work with the whole instrument. So when we have the whole clarinet together, right hand is on the bottom. Our thumb is going to go under the thumb rest. Left hand is going to be on top. This is going to float, and you want your fingers on both hands to be as close to the holes as you can. And once we start playing, you'll get an idea of how too close it is, because it will affect the pitch or how high or low the note is from where it should be. So, with our hands on the instrument how they should be, we're going to do the same thing with our embouchure. You put the reed against your bottom lip, tip where your lips will meet, push in so the top locks in behind your front teeth, bring the corners in, and then we're going to blow. And we're not going to have any fingers down, so we're going to be playing this note. And so this note is known as open G. We call it open G because everything's open. We have no fingers down. So one more time. If you're just getting air sounds, you probably want to speed your air up, bring your corners in a little bit tighter. If it feels like you're playing against a brick wall, the air is not coming through the instrument at all, loosen up your embouchure a little bit. So no fingers is open G, and if we're looking at the staff, this is going to be on the second line from the bottom. Now we're going to add some fingers and learn some new notes. So the first place I go from open G is we're going to go down to F natural, and this would be on the first space, lower on the staff because the pitch is going lower. And we play F natural with just the thumb. And before we want to play, you want to make sure the pad of the finger is closing the hole, and you can make sure that you're doing that by pushing down a little bit harder, and then you can check your fingers, see if there's a complete circle, and if there is, that means you're closing the pad completely. A lot of times beginners will have trouble with closing the holes, especially if their fingers are a little bit smaller and it takes up proportionally more of their finger to close that hole. It may look like their finger's closing it, but there may be just a tiny little air leak, and that tiny little air leak is enough to cause a squeak. But back to F natural, just the thumb. So we're going to put that thumb down, and we're going to go back to our embouchure, roll in the bottom lip over the bottom teeth, top of the mouthpiece behind the front teeth, bring the corners in. So there's F natural. Now what we want to try going from an open G, no fingers, to F natural, just the thumb. times. And it'll take some getting used to because your left hand, like I said before, is just floating. You have to get a feel for where that needs to sit and get an idea of how to put your thumb down and close that hole without looking at it. Let's go down and we'll start adding fingers on the front here. So we're going to keep the fingers down that we've already put down the lower we go. If we lift them up, then we're going to have holes open above the other ones, and that's going to cause a squeak. So what we're doing is we're closing the holes and we're making the tube that we use longer. So if we think of like wind chimes, the short tubes are the high-pitched ones, the long tubes are the low-pitched ones. We're doing the same thing when we put fingers down. We're changing the length of the clarinet tube because the sound will always come out of the first open hole. So when we go from open G, we put this thumb down. The first open hole when we have open G is this thumb hole. When we close that one, the next one is this first ring for the left hand. And so that's the next one that we're going to close. So when we have both the thumb and the first finger on the left hand down, this is going to be E natural, and this is going to be that first line on the staff. That's the sound we're going for. And so once you figure that out, we can try going from G down to F, down to E. So we're going to be open G, add the thumb to F natural, add the first finger to E. Once you have that down, we'll add the second finger on the left hand, and this will take us to D natural. This will be right below the staff. And as we add notes, make sure that you're always going back up to G and practicing going down. You can never get too much practice working on the fingers. Once you have that, we'll add the third finger on the left hand, and this will give us C. And this is where we'll start using ledger lines, which are temporary lines we use when notes are below the staff or above the staff, so that we have an idea of how far or high, or how far away from the staff they are. So C. Let's go back to G. We'll go play down to C. So here's where the sound may not be quite the same as mine. I've obviously been playing a long time, and beginners will have a lot rougher of a sound. Don't worry, that'll get cleared up with practice, and that's something that takes some refinement. Right now, we just want to worry about getting sound out and making sure that those fingers are working and closing the holes like they should be. Now we're going to start adding the right hand. So we have thumb, 1, 2, 3, down for the left hand. We're going to add the first finger on the right hand, which will give us B flat. Now flat means that the note is a half step lower than the natural version, whereas sharp, which we're not really going to talk about today, means it's a half step higher. And this note is B flat. Don't worry too much about that for right now. We just want to know that the fingering is for B flat rather than B natural. So one more time, that's thumb, 1, 2, 3 on the left hand, first finger on the right hand, and that gives us B flat. Next, we'll add the second finger, and this will give us A. And then the final one for today, we're going to add the third finger on the right hand, and this will give us G. And so now we get back to another G. We started with open G, now we have another G. And with the musical alphabet, we only use A through G, because once we get back to G and we'd be coming back to A, that's called an octave. And that's where the musical alphabet repeats. We get the same notes an octave higher, which is the higher version. And you can see this if you look at a piano keyboard. You can see there's a pattern of 12 keys, and that same pattern repeats over and over. And those are the different octaves. So that's how we can have open G versus a low G. And so low G is going to be thumb, 1, 2, 3 on the left hand, 1, 2, 3 on the right hand. If we play open G right next to low G, we can hear how they're similar, just one's higher, one's lower. Now I'll go down from open G to low G. So that's going to cover all of the rings on the clarinet. We're not going to worry about any of these extra keys just yet. We want to make sure that we have the main 6 rings and the thumb covered before we start adding the pinkies. So one more time, that's open G, thumb is F, thumb in 1 is E, thumb 1, 2, D, thumb 1, 2, 3 is C. All the left hand plus first on the right hand is B flat. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and thumb is A. Thumb 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 is low G. As a final note before we wrap up today, it's never too early to start working on articulation. So articulation is a fancy word for tonguing, and that's how you're going to separate notes when you're playing a wind instrument. And so to articulate or tongue on the clarinet, the main rule that you want to remember is tip of the tongue, tip of the reed. So we want to touch the tip of our tongue, somewhere around there, to the tip of the reed. And an important thing to remember is it's the face of the reed, like the top here. We don't want to tongue straight into the gap between the mouthpiece and the reed, because that's where the air needs to go. And we want to think T, like tea time or golf tee or whatever version of tea strikes your fancy. That's the syllable we want to think about for good, crisp clarinet articulation. So in addition to the finger exercises we were doing, try adding some articulation to it and start each note with a T. So that about covers it for our beginner intro lesson for clarinet. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to drop them in the comments. I'll be sure to address them. As always, like, subscribe, do the social media things. Check out the Patreon page if you are willing to support. Greatly appreciated. And we'll see you in the next video.